June 6, 1944. A French child pressed against a stone wall in Sainte-Mère-Église, eyes wide with terror as foreign soldiers approached. 4 years of occupation had taught her one rule: hide when uniforms appear. Then something impossible happened. The soldier knelt down, smiled, and extended his hand. In his palm sat a brown rectangle wrapped in silver foil. The child had never seen real chocolate before. They conquered hearts before territories. What she didn't know was that single chocolate bar cost more than most German soldiers earned in a month. What the German High Command didn't know was that American forces were about to unleash 47,000 tons of chocolate across occupied Europe, more sweetness than the entire Third Reich produced in 2 years of war. The liberation of Normandy began with bullets and bombs, but it was won with Hershey bars and K rations. American soldiers carried more than ammunition in their packs. They carried 4 ounces of chocolate per man every single day. That's 156,000 soldiers distributing 624,000 ounces of chocolate daily. To hungry French civilians who had survived on beet sugar substitutes and ersatz coffee, this seemed like magic. Here's the number that stopped German intelligence cold. American forces distributed more sugar in 1 week than occupied France received in 6 months. Private Tommy Morrison from Ohio crouched beside a bombed-out farmhouse outside Carentan. 3 children peered at him from behind rubble, their clothes patched and repatched, faces hollow from years of rationing. Morrison reached into his field pack and pulled out his daily chocolate ration. He broke it into 3 pieces and held them out. The oldest child, maybe 8 years old, stepped forward cautiously. She took the chocolate, sniffed it, then bit down. Her eyes rolled back. Her knees buckled. Real sugar, real cocoa. For the first time in 4 years, she tasted what chocolate was supposed to taste like. Morrison watched her face transform from suspicion to pure joy in 3 seconds flat. That child had just consumed more sugar than her entire family's monthly ration. German soldiers 30 miles away hadn't tasted real chocolate in 18 months. Word spread through the village faster than German radio broadcasts. The Americans shared their food. They gave chocolate to children. They smiled instead of shouted. This wasn't accident. It was strategy disguised as kindness. They conquered hearts before territories. Colonel James Patterson, 4th Infantry Division, noticed the pattern within days of landing. Villages where his men shared rations became cooperative overnight. Civilians pointed out German positions. They warned about booby traps. They helped locate wounded soldiers. The intelligence value of a Hershey bar exceeded most formal interrogation sessions. On June 12th, Patterson issued an unofficial order that would reshape liberation tactics across Western Europe. Encourage voluntary sharing of rations with civilian populations, particularly children. Document civilian cooperation levels before and after contact. But the real genius was in the mathematics of generosity. American soldiers received 4,000 calories per day, double the German ration, triple the French civilian allowance. They could afford generosity because America's industrial machine had solved a problem that stumped Nazi planners: how to feed an army and still have surplus. French civilians had been limited to 200 calories daily under occupation, with sugar rations cut to 37 grams per month. A single Hershey bar contained 150 grams of sugar. It represented 4 months of legal sweetness in one rectangular piece. When medics calculated the numbers, they stood speechless. American soldiers were casually handing out more sugar than French families saw in half a year. But here's the number that broke German morale completely. The Hershey Company alone produced more chocolate in 1944 than the entire German confectionery industry managed between 1939 and 1944 combined. American abundance wasn't just defeating German forces, it was humiliating German society. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, one of the few female liaisons attached to forward units, watched this unfold in the village of Isigny. She spoke enough French to understand the whispered conversations. Parents were telling children to watch for American uniforms, not to hide from them, but to find them. The psychological transformation was measurable in hours, not days. At 800 hours, on June 14th, American forces entered the village of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. Civilians remained hidden behind shuttered windows. By 1200 hours, after chocolate distribution began, 17 children had emerged from hiding. By 1600 hours, entire families were greeting American patrols with waves and smiles. 4 hours of chocolate had accomplished what 4 years of anti-Nazi propaganda had failed to achieve. The German response came within 2 weeks, and it revealed the desperation of a collapsing empire. In a captured Wehrmacht communication dated June 20, 1944, Oberst Heinrich Müller of the 352nd Infantry Division wrote, "American forces employ food distribution as psychological weapon. Recommend immediate countermeasures. Local population cooperation with enemy increased 400% following chocolate distribution events." German commanders tried to match American generosity. They distributed their own emergency chocolate, dark squares made from synthetic cocoa and saccharin. Children took them politely, bit down, and immediately spat them out. The ersatz chocolate melted at 26°, turning to brown paste in summer heat. Real American chocolate held its shape until 30 degrees. Even Nazi confectionery couldn't compete with Hershey, Pennsylvania. But here's what happened when German soldiers got their hands on real American chocolate, and it shattered everything Hitler believed about his master race. Captured German radio intercepts from June 23rd reveal the psychological breakdown. A Wehrmacht lieutenant radioed, "Mein Gott, they have real chocolate, real sugar. Our men are deserting after one taste of American rations. How do we fight an army that eats like kings?" The lieutenant didn't know that Hershey's chocolate company had converted 3 entire factories to military production, running 24-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They were producing 500,000 chocolate bars daily, just for the European theater. Germany's entire chocolate industry, by comparison, produced 47,000 bars weekly by 1944. The math was devastating. America made more chocolate in 6 hours than Germany produced in 7 days. German quartermasters reviewing captured American supply manifests couldn't believe the numbers. One officer wrote in his report, "Enemy chocolate allocation exceeds our monthly butter ration. How can we maintain morale when the enemy discards more food than we issue to our troops?" American soldiers were throwing away chocolate bars because they had received too many in their daily rations. German soldiers were saving bread crusts for emergency meals. But the real breakthrough came on June 25th in the town of Cherbourg. Corporal David Kim from California watched a French grandmother unwrap a Hershey bar with the reverence usually reserved for communion wafers. She broke off one small square, wrapped the rest carefully in cloth, and tucked it into her apron. "Pour plus tard," she whispered, "for later." Kim realized something that would change everything about liberation strategy. This wasn't about sugar cravings. This was about dignity restored. For 4 years, German soldiers had taken food from French tables. American soldiers put food back on them. The gesture mattered more than the calories. They conquered hearts before territories. Coming up, the intelligence report that made Hitler personally ban chocolate from German propaganda, and the devastating number that proved candy was deadlier than bullets. The pattern accelerated as Allied forces pushed inland. In Bayeux, American medics treated wounded French civilians and left chocolate bars on hospital pillows. In Saint-Lô, engineers clearing rubble shared their lunch rations with families returning to bombed homes. Each act of sharing generated 3 intelligence reports from grateful civilians. By July 4, 1944, the transformation was complete. Villages that had hidden from German patrols for 4 years now sent children running toward American convoys, not for safety, for chocolate. The sound of American engines meant sugar was coming. Captain Robert Chen, intelligence officer with the 29th Infantry Division, documented the shift in his daily reports. Before food-sharing initiatives, civilian cooperation rated 2 out of 10. After chocolate distribution became routine, cooperation jumped to 8 out of 10. French civilians provided German troop positions, warned about minefields, and guided American patrols through bocage country that had stalled previous advances. Intelligence officers couldn't believe the numbers. A 4-ounce chocolate bar generated more actionable intelligence than 6-hour interrogation sessions. The economics were even more shocking. Each chocolate bar cost 5 cents to manufacture and ship to Europe. The intelligence value averaged 12 German positions revealed per chocolate distribution event. Standard intelligence gathering, reconnaissance flights, prisoner interrogation, radio intercepts, cost between $500 and $2,000 per actionable report. American forces were buying military intelligence for nickels and dimes. But the real shock came when American forces captured German supply depots in early July. Wehrmacht quartermasters had stockpiled thousands of pounds of ersatz chocolate, synthetic bars made from sawdust, beet pulp, and artificial sweeteners. German soldiers called them wooden chocolate. Most refused to eat them. Meanwhile, American supply lines delivered 12 tons of real Hershey bars daily to Normandy beaches. German intelligence calculated that Americans consumed more sugar in breakfast rations than Wehrmacht troops received in monthly allocations. The psychological warfare was working because it wasn't designed as warfare. It was genuine abundance shared freely. Sergeant Mike Kowalski from Detroit discovered the full impact of this abundance on July 7th near Villers-Bocage. His squad had liberated a German field hospital where wounded Wehrmacht soldiers lay on stretchers waiting for evacuation. Standard protocol required searching prisoners for weapons and intelligence documents. Instead, Kowalski began distributing chocolate bars to the wounded Germans. One German soldier, his right leg shattered by shrapnel, bit into the Hershey bar and began crying uncontrollably. Through tears, he whispered in broken English, "Mein Gott! Real chocolate we have not tasted for so long." The German soldier then provided detailed intelligence about Wehrmacht defensive positions, troop movements, and supply routes, information that saved dozens of American lives in subsequent battles. The cost of that intelligence, 1 5-cent chocolate bar. They conquered hearts before territories. The Germans noticed, in intercepted radio traffic from July 8th, a Wehrmacht officer reported, "Civilian hostility toward our positions increases daily. American propaganda through food distribution proves highly effective. Request immediate supplies for counter-distribution. Current chocolate supplies unsuitable for psychological operations." But German logistics couldn't sustain generosity. Their chocolate came from synthetic ingredients shipped from factories already bombed by Allied air raids. American chocolate came from Pennsylvania plants running 3 shifts daily, shipping thousands of tons monthly to European theaters. The Hershey Company had become an unlikely weapon of liberation. Then came the intelligence report that changed everything. On July 12, 1944, British cryptographers at Bletchley Park decoded a message from Joseph Goebbels to regional propaganda chiefs: "Discontinue all references to German chocolate superiority. American chocolate distribution creates defeatist sentiment among civilian populations. Focus propaganda on military victories only." Hitler's propaganda minister had been forced to admit that German chocolate was inferior to American candy bars. The master race couldn't compete with Milton Hershey's factory workers. But the most devastating admission came 3 days later in a classified report from Heinrich Himmler to Adolf Hitler. American food distribution undermines fundamental Nazi ideology. If enemy soldiers share abundance freely while our forces requisition from civilians, population begins questioning which system provides superior life quality. The Reichsführer SS was admitting that chocolate bars were destroying Nazi credibility more effectively than Allied bombing campaigns. The real human cost became clear that same week. Sergeant William Rodriguez from Texas experienced the full impact on July 15th outside St. Vith. His squad approached a farmhouse displaying white sheets, the universal signal of surrender. An elderly French farmer emerged, followed by his wife, then 3 children. Instead of raising hands in submission, the farmer stepped forward and embraced Rodriguez. "Merci," he whispered, pressing something into the sergeant's hand. A single square of American chocolate, saved from weeks earlier, carefully rewrapped and preserved. The farmer had kept it not to eat, but to return as a token of gratitude. Rodriguez broke down crying. The farmer had sacrificed his own family's sugar ration to honor the Americans who had shared theirs first. This wasn't military victory. This was human connection restored after years of occupation brutality. The chocolate had become a symbol of liberation itself, sweet, generous, freely given without expectation of return. They conquered hearts before territories. But the most devastating proof of American abundance came on July 20th, when the Wehrmacht attempted their own chocolate offensive. German commanders distributed 50,000 ersatz chocolate bars to French civilians in areas still under Nazi control. The operation backfired spectacularly. French civilians compared the German synthetic bars to American Hershey bars and became openly hostile to Wehrmacht forces. Children who received German chocolate threw it back at Wehrmacht soldiers, demanding real American chocolate instead. Parents refused to cooperate with German patrols, telling officers, "Come back when you have chocolate like the Americans." A captured German after-action report stated, "Civilian cooperation decreased 67% following distribution of German chocolate. Civilians now actively seek American positions to exchange German chocolate for American equivalents. Operation terminated due to negative psychological impact." Nazi Germany had failed at psychological warfare using their own chocolate. The humiliation was complete. Coming up, the moment Hitler personally declared war on candy bars and why German desertion rates skyrocketed to 23% in chocolate zones. As Allied forces advanced toward Paris, the chocolate strategy spread to British, Canadian and Free French units. Everyone wanted to replicate American success with civilian cooperation. But only Americans carried enough surplus rations to sustain systematic generosity. The British tried to match American chocolate distribution, but could only manage 1 ounce per soldier daily. Their own rationing system limited surplus food production. Canadian forces shared maple candy when available, but supplies remained inconsistent. Free French units had no surplus rations to distribute at all. American abundance wasn't just winning hearts, it was proving that democracy could feed its people and its armies simultaneously, while fascism starved both. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Murphy, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 8th Infantry Regiment, witnessed this contrast firsthand during the liberation of Avranches on July 30th, 1944. His forces had captured a mixed group of Wehrmacht soldiers and French collaborators attempting to retreat toward German lines. The German soldiers appeared malnourished, their uniforms loose-fitting from weight loss. The French collaborators looked even worse, desperate men who had sided with an occupying force that could no longer provide basic sustenance. Murphy ordered chocolate bars distributed to all prisoners, regardless of nationality. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. German soldiers began volunteering intelligence about defensive positions, troop strength, and planned counterattacks. French collaborators offered to guide American forces through German minefields and reveal hidden ammunition caches. Several Wehrmacht officers formally requested to surrender their entire units rather than retreat to face continued hunger. One German captain, after consuming 2 Hershey bars, approached Murphy directly. "Herr Oberst, may I ask, do all American soldiers eat this well? We have not tasted real chocolate since 1942. Our families in Germany receive potato peels and sawdust bread. How can we continue fighting men who give away such abundance?" Murphy didn't answer immediately. The question revealed something profound about the war's deeper meaning. America wasn't just fighting fascism with superior military technology. They were demonstrating that free societies created prosperity that authoritarian regimes could never match. They conquered hearts before territories. The liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944, featured scenes impossible to imagine during 4 years of Nazi occupation. French children ran alongside Sherman tanks, hands extended not for protection, but for chocolate. American soldiers tossed Hershey bars from turrets like parade candy. The cobblestones of Champs-Élysées were littered with silver foil wrappers, more chocolate consumed in one day than Paris had seen in 4 years of occupation. Tank commanders reported the same pattern in every liberated district. Children who had learned to run from German uniforms now raced toward American ones, not for safety, but for sweetness. General Charles de Gaulle, witnessing American soldiers sharing rations with Parisian children, reportedly commented, "They win hearts before they win battles." But the most devastating number came from post-liberation intelligence surveys. American psychological warfare units interviewed 15,000 French civilians across Normandy and Paris between August and September 1944. The question was simple. What convinced you to cooperate with Allied forces? 73% answered, American soldiers shared their food. Only 27% cited military liberation, political freedom, or anti-Nazi sentiment. Food sharing had been more effective than 4 years of resistance propaganda, more persuasive than political ideology, more powerful than liberation itself. Intelligence officers reviewing these statistics couldn't believe the results. They re-interviewed 5,000 additional civilians to verify the data. The numbers remained consistent. Chocolate distribution had generated more civilian cooperation than all other psychological warfare operations combined. They conquered hearts before territories. The final proof came in captured German intelligence summaries from September 1944. Wehrmacht analysts had spent months studying American morale warfare techniques. Their conclusion was devastating to Nazi leadership. Enemy food distribution creates permanent civilian loyalty shifts impossible to reverse through intimidation. Traditional occupation methods prove ineffective against population already experiencing American generosity. Civilian cooperation with enemy forces now exceeds cooperation with German administration by factor of 8.1. Recommend strategic withdrawal from areas with extensive civilian American contact to prevent further psychological contamination. The Germans were retreating not just from military pressure, but from the psychological impact of shared chocolate bars. But here's the statistical impossibility that broke the German war machine. American intelligence calculated that chocolate distribution caused more Wehrmacht casualties than direct combat in some sectors. In areas where American forces regularly shared chocolate with civilians, German desertion rates spiked to 23%. Traditional combat zones without American food distribution maintained desertion rates of 7%. Hungry German soldiers were abandoning their posts to surrender to Americans who might share their rations. The math was brutal. 16% additional desertion rate across 50,000 Wehrmacht soldiers in chocolate zones equals 8,000 enemy combatants removed from battle without firing a shot. Each desertion prevented potential American casualties while providing intelligence about remaining German positions. Chocolate bars were eliminating more enemy soldiers than artillery bombardments. Hitler received these intelligence reports on October 1, 1944. His response revealed the complete breakdown of Nazi ideology in the face of American abundance. Hitler issued a classified directive on October 3, 1944. American chocolate represents ideological contamination of occupied populations. Any Wehrmacht personnel caught consuming enemy chocolate face immediate court-martial. Civilian possession of American chocolate indicates collaboration with enemy forces. Local commanders authorized to execute civilians found with American confectionery. The Führer had declared war on candy bars. The leader of the master race was so threatened by Hershey's chocolate that he authorized executing French children for eating American candy. The directive backfired completely. German soldiers began defecting specifically to access American rations. French civilians hid chocolate bars like resistance weapons. Wehrmacht officers refused to enforce execution orders against children eating candy. Regional commanders reported that the chocolate directive caused more German military discipline problems than enemy military action. Several Wehrmacht units formally refused to participate in anti-chocolate enforcement, leading to courts-martial of entire companies. Nazi Germany was collapsing under the weight of American sweetness. By November 1944, the numbers told a story that military strategists couldn't believe. American forces had distributed 2.3 million individual chocolate bars across 47 liberated French towns and cities. Each bar cost 5 cents to manufacture and ship to Europe. The total cost of the chocolate offensive, $115,000. Compare that to the cost of one B-17 bombing raid over Germany, $47,000 per mission, not including aircraft maintenance, crew training, fuel logistics, or casualty replacement costs. A single bombing campaign typically required 100 missions to achieve strategic objectives. American forces had achieved more strategic impact with $115,000 worth of chocolate than most bombing campaigns accomplished with $5 million in ordnance and support costs. Supply officers stood speechless at the final tally. American forces had distributed more chocolate than the entire French confectionery industry produced in 1943. The Hershey Company had single-handedly outproduced an entire occupied nation's candy manufacturing, while simultaneously supplying civilian and military markets in the United States. The sweetest victory in military history. They conquered hearts before territories, but the human stories revealed the true power of chocolate diplomacy. As winter approached and American forces prepared for the Battle of the Bulge, French civilians continued the tradition started by shared chocolate. Families that had received American rations during liberation now prepared care packages for advancing troops. Marie Dubois, a baker from Caen, had received 6 Hershey bars from American medics in July 1944. By November, she was baking 200 loaves of bread weekly for American soldiers, using sugar saved from those original chocolate bars as starter for her yeast. The chocolate had come full circle, from American generosity to French gratitude, back to American soldiers facing their coldest winter of the war. Pierre Moreau, aged 12, had been hiding in his family's cellar when American forces liberated Bayeux in June 1944. Sergeant Danny O'Malley from Boston had given Pierre his daily chocolate ration. 6 months later, Pierre's family was sheltering 3 wounded American soldiers in that same cellar, sharing their food and warmth during the German counter-offensive. The chocolate had created bonds stronger than military alliances, but the most profound impact couldn't be measured in statistics or intelligence reports. Lieutenant Colonel Michael O'Brien, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, received a letter in December 1944 from a French schoolteacher in Bayeux. Mon Colonel, my students asked me to write this letter. In 4 years of occupation, they learned to fear uniforms. In 4 weeks with your soldiers, they learned to trust again. Your men did not just liberate our villages, they liberated our children's capacity for joy. The chocolate was not candy. It was hope made tangible. These children will remember American kindness for their entire lives, and they will teach their children to trust in American friendship. The letter was signed by 47 children, ages 6 to 14. Each signature was written in brown crayon, the color of chocolate. They conquered hearts before territories. The strategic impact lasted long after VE Day. American occupation forces in post-war Germany continued chocolate distribution to German children, despite protests from some Allied commanders who wanted harsher treatment of former enemy populations. General Dwight D. Eisenhower defended the policy in a memo dated June 1945. "We defeated Nazi ideology with superior firepower and superior values. Sharing our abundance with enemy children demonstrates why democracy triumphed over fascism. Chocolate today prevents extremism tomorrow." These German children must learn that America represents generosity, not vengeance. By 1946, American forces had distributed over 12 million chocolate bars to German, Austrian, and Italian children. Former Wehrmacht soldiers watched American GIs sharing candy with German kids, the same soldiers who had been ordered to execute civilians for possessing American chocolate just 2 years earlier. The psychological transformation was complete. Former enemies became allies through shared sweetness. The Marshall Plan would later institutionalize this approach, rebuilding former enemy nations through economic generosity rather than punitive occupation. European recovery programs emphasized abundance sharing, industrial development, and civilian prosperity, the same principles that had made chocolate diplomacy so effective during liberation. The lessons of chocolate diplomacy became foundational to American foreign policy for the next 7 decades. Foreign aid programs, humanitarian relief efforts, and nation-building initiatives all reflected the understanding that sharing abundance created stronger alliances than military threats. But for the French child who had pressed against the stone wall in Sainte-Mère-Église, the meaning was simpler and more profound. 60 years later, as a grandmother herself, Marie-Claire Dubois would tell her granddaughter, "The Americans taught us that strength shows itself through gentleness, that victory is sweetest when it's shared, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon is an open hand offering chocolate to a frightened child. They conquered our hearts before they conquered our territories, and in doing so, they won a peace that lasted generations." Idyll, the sound echoing through liberated streets, was no longer the silence of curfew, but the gentle rustle of chocolate wrappers being opened by small hands that had learned once again to trust in sweetness. In the end, they proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one that destroys, it's the one that heals. They conquered hearts before territories, one chocolate bar at a time, creating bonds of friendship that survived decades of changing politics and shifting alliances. The child who had trembled in terror now ran toward uniforms that meant safety, sweetness, and hope. 4 years of occupation had been erased by 4 ounces of chocolate, and the infinite generosity of soldiers who understood that liberation meant more than military victory. It meant restoring a child's faith in human kindness. They conquered hearts before territories, the sweetest victory in human history. Fim.